This happened to me recently and I have not reported it yet. I have not reported it because I don't even know what to say. I don't know how to explain how I found it or what I actually witnessed without sounding crazy. Basically, I worked as a regional infrastructure contractor for around 6 years or so. I mean, I still do. I'm not exactly sure why I'm talking about my job in the past tense. I guess because I just want to lock myself in my room and never work again. Most of the jobs that I handled are things like drainage culvert, flood tunnels, inspecting sewers, etc. Things that are usually well out of the way, and not something people would really think about. Things that are underneath your feet at all times that you take for granted. Basically, the city had been preparing to expand a road on the south end of the town. They had been planning this for quite a while. I'm not telling you where I live, just in case. Anyway, before the excavation started, they wanted a structural survey of an old storm drainage network. This network runs underneath several blocks near the river. The tunnels date back to the 1940s, and as far as I'm aware, a large section had not been inspected for decades. Call it incompetence, laziness, cost-cutting. I'm sure any one of those reasons could fit the bill. My job was pretty simple on paper. I would be sent down with a headlamp and a handheld scanner, along with a radio. They wanted me to map the condition of the concrete lining and check for any collapses or obstructions. They wanted to be aware if anything could complicate work on the road later. I say road, but it's much more of a highway, really. I had done similar work before, dozens of times, but never anything of this size. They would usually send you down with a partner, sometimes a team if the area to cover was this large. I was not so lucky. I guess they didn't want to pay for extra people on top of everything else. I guess they thought I could just get it done on my own. Still, I wasn't really intimidated by the job. The tunnels are very samey, so you get used to them very quickly. As long as you're fine with rats scuttling around and mud clumping to your boots, you are pretty much fine. You might get a little wet from the standing water, but that is par for the course. What I found down there, though, it was not the typical things. I accessed these tunnels using a metal hatch in a fenced service lot near the riverbank. Once I climbed down the ladder, I found myself in a round concrete pipe about 8 feet across, with a thin stream of water running down the center. The air smelled really horrible, as you would imagine. Of course, you had the regular sewage smells, but there was something else in the air that I just could not put my finger on. I walked for around maybe 15 minutes, just documenting what I saw. Everything looked exactly the same as every other job I'd ever done, aside from some cracks in the concrete here and there. At one point, I reached a junction in the tunnel. The main pipe split into 3 side passages. These passages were old and not really well maintained. I shined my flashlight down them. I could not really see much until I caught the glimmer of something metal. Empty food cans, I guess. There was just a stack of them arranged neatly along the wall. It looked like someone set them up in a tower for target practice. They did not look all that old. The metal was not rusted or weathered. The first thing that sprang to my mind was that there were some homeless people lurking down here. It happens from time to time. It's usually the really desperate ones who cannot find anything better. They make temporary shelters down there, especially during the winter. I have run into them before, once or twice in the past. Usually, if you leave them alone, you are fine, but I have been threatened with a knife by a group of them before. Anyway, I kept moving deeper into the tunnel while continuing my inspection. I was on high alert, but I just wanted to get everything over and done with. I kept finding stranger and stranger things as I made my way down the tunnel. I saw what looked like melted lines of candle wax running down the mortar in between the bricks. It looked as if someone had burned dozens of candles in the same few spots across a long period of time. Years, if I had to make a guess. You could still smell the burning in the air. At one point, I found very clear signs that someone was squatting down here. There were bundles of filthy blankets that had been pushed into a dry corner just above the waterline. The edges of them were slightly damp, and they looked to be turning a brown color. They looked to be sat atop a mattress that had chunks torn out of it. All of the padding inside was exposed, and there was a slump in the middle where it had just all gone. I kept moving and moving, making sure to use my recorder and take proper notes. Something was definitely going to have to be done about all of this. These people, they were going to have to be removed for the work to begin. Further down the tunnel, I found this big pile of rusted shopping carts. Some of them were all lined up neatly against the wall, and after that they were just everywhere, tipped over on the ground, stacked on top of other ones. They were all filled up with piles of junk, buckets containing who knows what. For me, it just looked like miscellaneous brown liquid. Some of them had rotting food, some of them had stale water, some of them had what looked like piles of bones, just really tiny ones. They looked like they came from some kind of small animal and were piled up here for waste. There were more piles of bones further down the way too, bigger than the previous ones. Must have been bigger animals, I suppose. And that was not all I found. I found a pile of shoes. Sometimes there were pairs, sometimes it was just odd shoes. They were all stacked up in a pile. Some of them even looked like children's shoes. It was at this point I was starting to freak out a little bit. I just kept making notes. I was carrying, as I always do. My job does not explicitly allow me to do that, but heck if I'm gonna go anywhere alone without my gun. I figured if there were a couple homeless people, then I would be safe. I started using my phone to take pictures as best as I could, just to detail the mess. It was hard due to the low light, and my flashlight made the pictures look really washed out. After standing there for a little while and taking everything in, I started to hear movement. It was coming from deeper in the tunnel ahead of me. It wasn't light enough to be rats. I was hearing steps, multiple steps, heavy steps. This was followed by the sound of something scraping along the floor. The sound stopped for a little while. Then I think I heard the sounds of splashing water, and then I heard screaming and shouting. I tried to move as slowly and carefully as I could. If I actually had a brain, I would have just run right out of there and reported it to the police, but I wanted to know. I figured if something was going on, I could maybe help, but I was wrong, way wrong. I walked for maybe another 50 feet before the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. I had my flashlight off by this point, just so I could move undetected. It took a while for my eyes to adjust to the low light, but there were people in that tunnel, a whole group of people. They were partially illuminated by candlelight, just enough to make out faint details. There were at least a dozen people, maybe even more. They were mostly just crouching while huddled all together in groups. They were all around these metal barrels. I think there was a tiny bit of light seeping out from the top of them. I guess they were using them for fires. These people, they looked extremely pale, like they had never seen sunlight for their entire lives. Their eyes were kinda glazed over a little, is what it looked like, but I couldn't fully tell because they were quite far away. They were all wearing assorted rags, dirty clothes that were torn in places and that did not match. It looked like they'd run through someone's yard and stolen their laundry and just put on whatever they could steal. Some of these people were shaved to a buzz cut. Others had long grown out hair that was stuck together in clumps and looked matted with mud and other filth. None of them stood completely upright. They all seemed to walk and move around while crouched or while low to the ground. They moved with this weird walk and posture, and it made me feel nervous. I don't know how long I stared. A minute? Maybe 2 minutes? And then I think they started talking to each other. but they didn't make any sounds I could make out. They weren't talking any kind of language that I knew. They were just making sounds, grunts and clicks and the like. They seemed to be in a stir and started talking to each other quite loudly. And then they all began looking to the far end of the chamber. There was a faint light coming from that direction that was starting to grow. And then I saw more of them walk out from that direction. I could hear this muffled sound coming from just behind them as they did their strange crab walk. It sounded like someone struggling, like muffled shouting and crying. I could hear something scraping against the floor. It sounded like boots. These pale figures, they were pulling a man across the floor. He looked like he'd been beaten pretty badly too. He was wearing a high-vis vest. You could not miss it. He was wearing pants that were covered in dirt, and he had blood running down his nose that had stained into his sweater. They were dragging him by his hair. He was bound at the wrists by electrical wire, I think it looked like. As he got dragged closer to the fire, which the others had started putting more trash into to burn brighter, I could see that his face was swollen too. It was purple and bumpy in places. The man was conscious, just barely, but he could hardly keep his eyes open. He was just kicking his feet out from himself while trying to shout, but he didn't even really have the energy. It's like he couldn't do both at once. These pale figures dragged him to the center where the metal barrel was, and the figures gathered around him. When he was on the floor, one of the figures, this really large man, pressed a knee into his back, while another figure held his head still so that he could not struggle. The man they had pinned down, he started begging. He said he would do anything. He said he would give them money. He promised that he would get the government to help them. The figure that was holding him by the head, he spoke. It was the only time I could ever understand him. It was the only time he ever spoke English. He told the man that he had pinned down to the floor to shut the fuck up, and then he spat on the floor beside him. His voice sounded gruff and full of mucus. It sounded like he'd barely spoken in years. And then the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen happened next. You're probably asking why I didn't just mag dump and help this guy. Because I was shaking, and I was not sure I would hit all of my targets, especially with how they moved. I wasn't a one-man army. I had 2 magazines, not a fucking bandolier full of it. I also didn't know how many they were. Even if I hit every single bullet dead on like Rambo, who is to say that they were not more waiting down other tunnels, waiting to ambush me and beat me, just like this man was. One of the figures, he looked a lot older than the rest. He approached the pinned down man. He was holding this metal rod type of thing that was really long and looked to be sharpened at one end. When he approached, the circle of them stepped back in order to give him space. The 2 figures holding the man down stripped him naked, and some of the other figures carried the clothes away down a dark passage. I saw one of them trying his boots on before he had even left. The pinned down man was just crying. The older figure approached and examined the man. He sniffed him. He used chalk to draw some kind of a circle around the man, and then he drove the metal rod into his side. The scream that I heard, the way it echoed all the way through the tunnel, I can still hear it ringing in my ears to this day. I had to actually cover my own mouth to stop myself from screaming and getting myself caught. The older figure removed the rod, and the blood just started gushing from the man. I'm not sure if he died right then and there, or if he was alive for a little bit longer. I really pray that he died instantly, just for his sake. The older figure, he actually reached down with his fingers and put them in the blood. He tasted the blood, and then he licked the wound that he caused. He actually bent down and licked the man's wound. Then he circled the man until he reached his rear, and he drove the rod into the man again. I did not hear him scream this time, but I don't know if that's because my brain blocked it out, or if he just didn't make one, if he was already dead or passed out or whatever. The older figure, he communicated with some of the others, and they communicated back. The group got closer and started to touch and lick the man, touching and licking the blood. They shook him and they kicked him, and when they realized he was not moving anymore, they dragged his body away. They dragged him down a dark passage. I couldn't even see where they went. I had already started backing away at this point. I was in a state of shock and panic and just unrealness. I watched the crowd of these figures scatter down the tunnels. They moved so incredibly quickly, at least twice as fast as I could run, which amazed me and frightened me at the same time, considering how weirdly they moved. I managed to find my way back eventually. I thankfully did not run into any of those things on the way. For a long time, after I got out of those tunnels, I just stood there, not knowing what to do. I knew what I had just witnessed, but at the same time, I had no idea what I just saw. And I didn't know whether to believe my eyes or if my brain just made it all up. Those tunnels, they connect all over the city and the town. They connect to miles and miles of underground passages, storm tunnels, abandoned utility shafts, who knows what else. Who knows where they could end up. Who knows what the hell is going on down there. And I have to bring this report to my boss in just a couple of days. I have to look him in the eyes and tell him that there are people underneath there. I have to tell him that I witnessed a murder by some batshit crazy homeless people, and I could not do anything but watch. I do not know what I am going to do. I seriously need some help. Please, if you can give me any kind of information, any way I can explain this without losing my job, or even just tell me what the hell is going on down there. Please, I am so desperate. I was like 10 or 11 years old when this happened to me. My sister is staying with a friend. It's just me and my grandparents. Time goes by. They go to sleep. I decide to stay up and screw around in the computer room, watching cat videos and getting rickrolled like an idiot. Thanks, T6. It's the internet golden age. Shit is rad. Something like 1 a.m. rolls around. I'm the only one up. I see something out of the corner of my eye. I turn to see a woman in a white nightgown with dark hair walking out of my grandparents' room, past me, into the kitchen, which is separated by a small wall, followed by a bar. Oh, it's just Grandma. I tried to say something, but she keeps on walking into the very dark kitchen. I get up to follow her and see what she is up to. I never know if I might need to help with something. I make it to the kitchen entrance and stop. Something feels wrong. As I write this, I think I realize what made it feel off. My grandparents have a porch light that is just outside of the back room, which is on the other side of the kitchen. They have a ritual every single night. Lock the doors, turn on the porch lights. But there is no light. It's like the kitchen and the back room have turned into a black hole, like there's an impenetrable wall of blackness just in front of the entrance to the back room. I work up the courage to keep on walking. I make it halfway through the kitchen. I am staring into the back room, trying to make out a picture of anything. I don't see anything, but the feeling I got before suddenly gets ramped up from 1 to 100. Something is really, really off. I turn my ass back around and go back to the well-lit computer room. I decide to check on my grandparents. I open the door and look inside to see both of my grandparents sound asleep. What the hell? I decide to leave them be and watch the security cam monitors to see if I can catch someone leaving. I see and hear absolutely nothing, nobody coming or going. I'm spooked for a while, but being a 10-year-old with the attention span of a gerbil, I eventually fall asleep. I had almost forgotten about this encounter, but I was reminded of it years later when my grandmother was telling me about her mother. Apparently, she got cancer, and in her final year, she lived and died in that back room. This shit really stuck with me, especially after analyzing it in hindsight. My grandparents' door was closed when I checked, and if they happened to close it at the time that I saw the figure, I would have certainly heard it, since I was no more than 10 feet away from the bedroom during the entirety of the encounter. But I heard nothing, not even from the security monitors, which typically have a constant droning sound. What also gets me is that if there was someone moving around inside, the dogs would have barked. My grandparents have a habit of keeping a small legion of weenie dogs that incessantly bark at literally any movement inside or out. It's odd that they did not even bark at me, much less an intruder. That experience will always be what I consider to be what spurred on my interest in the supernatural. I unironically get chills when I think about how the apparition was only but a few feet away from me as it walked past. I even remember the feeling of the air rushing by me as they moved. Part of me wants to believe that it is my great-grandmother watching out for me, but the sense of dread that I felt, combined by the other strange experiences I've had, convinced me it might be something else entirely. Like I said, I've had more than one interaction with ghosties. Here's my experience with what I dubbed Shadow Man. He was also my first paranormal encounter. I was 6 or 7 years old or so at the time. I was living with my mom and my sister in a 2-story apartment. The rooms are upstairs. The kitchen and the living room are downstairs. I always woke up before my mom, and I would go downstairs to wait for her to come down and make coffee because I could not reach the coffee maker. Our morning cup was our ritual. It's odd, but I've been drinking coffee for as long as I've been alive. Love that shit. One day I'm just chilling in the recliner. I am waiting for her to wake up so we can do stuff like any other day. I see something on the stairway. There's a shadow of a man just walking up and down the stairs. I watch for a while. He kind of stops and motions towards me before walking back up the stairs. My child instincts kick in and tell me that I should be scared. I cover my head up with a quilt that my grandmother made. It was enough to feel hidden as a stupid kid, but I could still see through it. The shadow man is just pacing up and down, back and forth on the stairs. I'm adequately freaked out, but I try not to cry. This goes on for about 5 minutes. Then my mother comes down the stairs. I immediately tell her about it. It becomes my obsession to draw pictures of the shadow man, to try and show her what I saw. I would absolutely share those pictures with X if I could find them. It's been over a decade, and we have moved so many times that they have certainly been lost. If I ever find them, I will share them though. And here is another story. Not associated with ghosts or necessarily hair-raising scary, but the mystery of it leaves a weird feeling in my gut. For context, in this story, I was older, probably 11 or 12 years old at the time. I was on a forced visitation with my father, who is undoubtedly a schizo like myself. He lived with his mother, whose property is located right next to a sizable forest. Be visiting my father. We decided to chill on the back porch at around 9 p.m. My dad is a guitar man. He busts some tunes. All is chill for a little while. My dad stops playing the guitar. Then we hear something coming from the woods. What the hell are those people? We stop and listen. My dad, myself, and my grandmother all distinctly and unmistakably hear what sounds like a boy calling for help from the woods. Then it's followed by another voice, what sounds like an older man calling for help. Oh shit, someone might be lost out there. My dad grabs a flashlight and tells me to stay put. He walks up to the tree line and starts yelling out to them to follow his voice. He gets no reply. Yeah, this shit is weird. My dad and grandma decide to call the police in case there is someone actually out there. The police show up and ask us what happened. We explain, and they supposedly sent out troopers to comb the area. A little while later, they come back empty-handed. They don't think anyone is out there. Okay. Years later, I'm probably 14 at the time. I am staying at my aunt's for a few days to visit. We do not get to see them very often. It's around 11 p.m. at the time. Everyone is watching the football game. I'm playing Halo 3 with my cousin. Man, good times. I suddenly hear everyone freaking out. I go to see what's up. The adults are gathered by the window, trying to look at something. They won't let me near. They tell me there is what looks like a man standing at the tree line, looking at the house. Remember, after you hit that tree line, you are not going to run into a house for a while. It's all very rural from there on. Eventually, after their staring competition, the person walks back into the woods. They eventually rationalize that it might be an escaped prisoner. That happens sometimes in those parts. They call the cops again. They show up, and they do another search. They come back and essentially say, "Lol, I don't know. We did not find anyone." I don't really know what happened in these last two stories. I'd say it resembles the typical Skinwalker/Fleshgate pattern, but the problem is that this kind of thing is not supposed to happen in the southeast USA. That's something you usually hear out of NM, Maine, or any other state that has strong Native American ties. I have a few more stories from this town on various subjects if anyone would like to hear. Some of the stories are not necessarily my own or scary, but something really dark happened in that town that made me form a conspiracy regarding the area's local government. Okay, sure, I am short on time today, but I will try and summarize as best as I can. This one has to do with an event that scarred my entire town. I will note that I cannot really validate how authentic this is, since I got most of the details from my kid sister, who went to school with the victim. This was around the same time as the last story, sometime before, I think. My little sister was with a friend. We will call her T. T was having her birthday party with a bunch of kids at her house. Her house was a trailer that sat in front of a small patch of woods. At some point during the party, while everyone else was having fun, T left the group and went to her treehouse that was out at the back of the woods. The party continued for a while, and all of the kids went home around sunset. T's parents realized that she had not come back from the treehouse, and being concerned, went out to look for her. They found her in the treehouse, dead. According to my sister, it was originally treated as a murder. She told me that T had been found, nearly decapitated, hanging from the neck by barbed wire. The weird part is that, very shortly afterwards, they backtracked and called it a suicide, dropped it then and there, with no further investigation at all. My poor sister was traumatized. She learned that one of her best friends had died on her own birthday. I sometimes wonder if there was a cover-up, or if small-town cops are just that eager to sweep something underneath the rug. The word around town was that the guy running for mayor was a pedophile and had done some horrible things before he started running for office. It makes me really think. So, when this happened to me, I was driving into Fayetteville, North Carolina to buy a fridge. I see a sun-tanned old homeless woman on her bike. I get hit up for money by this woman every single time I go to a certain shopping center. The employees all know her, and they don't seem to give her any trouble. I notice that she is just staring blankly ahead. I figure that she is tweaked out on meth and park at the far side of the Lowe's by the garden center. I order the fridge, because they did not have it in stock. I am walking back to the truck. I notice that she is biking toward me, but still staring off into the ether. I pick up my pace, because I really don't feel like dealing with a drugged-up homeless person today. I am just about at my truck when I see her slowly lift her head up to look at me. She is about 50 feet away. I can see how sad she looks. She poofs right out of existence. Right before my eyes, she literally poofs out of existence, bike and all. I stand there, staring for a while, confused. I get in my truck and drive home. I could not stop thinking about her. I pick up my fridge the following week, and that homeless woman pops into my mind. I ask one of the workers I usually chit-chat with, old woman, total hippie, if she has seen her around. She seems confused, and does not know who I am even talking about. I explain how she is homeless and has been riding around the parking lot for 6 years, begging for change. I know for a fact that this woman knows her, because she has come up in our conversations once before, talking about the interesting characters in the area. Nope. She has no idea, apparently. She says that she has never seen her before in her entire life. On the drive back home, I am scouring the shopping center for this homeless lady, but I do not see her anywhere. I think I saw a person get deleted from existence. That wasn't even the only person I asked. I've asked other workers who I know who have had run-ins with this woman before. Workers who I have seen personally kick this woman out of stores and tell her to never come back. People who have gotten angry at her, and not a single one of them remembers her anymore. At one point, I felt so desperate and like I was going crazy that I actually found other homeless people near where she camped or lived or whatever, and I asked them about her too, and not a single one of them remembers ever seeing her in their camp. I don't think you could just forget a homeless old lady who rides around a bike asking for change for years. I will ask a few other people when I go back up this weekend, but the fact that all these people do not remember, it really freaks me out.